the Judge-Your-Neighbor Worksheet of Byron Katie, we've worked on that what our wants are. And this week, we're going to work on the advice that we would give people. But before we get into that, I always like to start out with a quote from Baba from Discourses on the Mind, because I've been amazed to see how Baba's words on the mind completely support this self-inquiry work of Byron Katie. So this is from Discourses, 7th edition online, page 206, and then I'll read another little one from page 223. In ordinary thinking, the uninterrupted flow of relevant trains of ideas is common, but when the mind sets itself to systematic meditation, there is inevitably a reactionary tendency for irrelevant and contrary thoughts to emerge and create disturbances. This is the law of the mind, and the aspirant should not be upset by the appearance in the consciousness of many contrary and unwholesome thoughts that had hitherto never made their appearance. Meditation involves bringing the subconscious contents of the mind to the forefront of consciousness. And this is what the work does too. We're bringing the subconscious and unconscious contents of our minds into consciousness. And he goes on to say, like the conjurer who summons into existence many strange and unexpected things, the process of meditation invites many absurd and unwanted thoughts. The aspirant must expect and be prepared for all these disturbing thoughts and should exercise inexhaustible patience with unshakable confidence that ultimately all these disturbances will be overcome. The soul, instead of realizing the oversoul, gets involved in cosmic illusion, and hence, though really infinite, it comes to experience itself as finite. In other words, when the soul develops consciousness, it does not become conscious of its own true nature, but of the phenomenal world, which is its own shadow. So does anybody have any comments that they'd like to make about these words? And you be sure to unmute yourself if you do. So Baba talks about meditation as being concentration, and Byron Katie talks about the work as being meditation. And I've really come to see over the years that we do learn to concentrate our minds in this process on the statement that we've identified to be a stressful belief or thought that we hold. And then when we put it up against the 4 questions of the work, we're able to allow ourselves to just let these beliefs dissolve. That's what they do. In time, they just have less power over us. And it's really important to recognize that we all have to deal with the unconscious. And that's, you know, again, Baba says, God realization is when unconsciousness becomes conscious. So this is the definition of God realization, self-realization. And so our work is to very gently and patiently bring these subconscious contents up and honor them. You know, they shouldn't be repressed and suppressed, which has been what we've been taught over the years, and it never works. We just sit with them and we notice what is it that they need from us. They just need to be listened to, heard, and honored, and then they're finally able to go on their way and be at peace. So I want to share with you something I read this week from this book, Catching the Thread. Well, you don't really need to see it. It's by Llewellyn Von Lee. He's a Sufi. And the subtitle is Sufism, Dream Work, and Jungian Psychology. And this is from pages 54 and 55. So, caught in the duality of our shadow, we project its darkness onto others. And of course, we've been talking about this. That's what we do in the work. We project our judgments onto others because that's the only way that we can find our own blind spots. We can't find them inside of ourselves. So our shadow has to project onto others. We dislike or find unbearable a sibling, a classmate, or neighbor, not realizing that it is our own rejected self to which we are reacting. The power of projection is that we do not need to acknowledge our own faults, to look our darkness in the face. But for some people, there comes the time when so much energy and unlived potential are caught in this dynamic of projection. So much of our inner self is trapped through rejection that we feel the need to reclaim our shadow. Then, if we follow our negative reactions to others, they will lead us to this rejected self. And then he's got a little couplet here. I looked and saw that what I thought was you and you is really me and me. And I did find that after many, many worksheets on my father. The final worksheet was when I actually experienced that he was a mirror showing me my work. And then there was only love. That's all that was left. And I've never had to even be triggered by any thoughts of him again. I just feel pure love for him and compassion. So I'm going to continue on. So first we have to find the shadow. And that's what we're doing in this virtual inquiry circle. We're finding our shadows. We're getting the thoughts down on paper so that we can really look at it. Katie says all war belongs on paper. So we're going to deal with our shadow one step at a time. So then he goes on to say, first we have to find the shadow. Then once it is acknowledged, it can be embraced. To acknowledge the shadow does not mean to live it out. We do not have to become a needy child. Rather, we have to accept our shadow, nurture the child from within. If our shadow is bitchiness or cruelty, we have to look at and love that despised part of ourself. And I can't tell you how important this is. I really found, the cruel part of myself that I never acknowledged before the work. And there's grief in it, and there's a mourning, and there's, but it passes. And then he says, such confrontation is no easy task. It is always easier to blame someone else. Moreover, as we start to acknowledge our faults and inadequacies, the ego identity which we have so carefully constructed begins to crumble. The individual's specious unity that emphatically says, I want, I think, breaks down under the impact of the unconscious. So long as the individual can think that somebody else, for example, his father or mother, is responsible for his difficulties, he can save some semblance of unity. But once he realizes that he himself has a shadow, that his enemy is in his own heart, then the conflict begins and one becomes two. So he's talking about how we just project and blame the world, and whatever our projection lands on, we blame that. And it can be subtle. It can be very subtle. And I think a lot of the work we're doing here is very subtle. And yet it keeps us from finding the light in our own heart, which Baba is asking us to do. He says, I can only come and live in your heart as you make more and more room for me. So this work is actually allowing us to cleanse our hearts. When we come to realize what Baba has always said is that the mind projects the world and the mind is the mirror, and we just are getting the dust off of the mirror as we stop blaming anything outside of ourselves. So we effectively recognize that we are not victims. And that doesn't mean that the work of self-realization isn't difficult, because it is, and Baba acknowledges that. And he said, and if it was easy, it wouldn't be worth it. So we've been working the last few weeks on they hurt me with their criticism, and everyone is finding their own specific example. And we're going to keep that example when we go into the Judge-Your-Neighbor Worksheet. So you could put that up, Diantha. We're going to work on the advice, which is number 3. Last week we worked on what we want in that situation. And so now I'm going to have everybody find, I just want to see what the statement was we did last week. I want them to stop criticizing me. That's what we worked on last week. And then this week we're going to work on they should realize that criticism hurts me. The reason I need to pick a generic statement is because we're doing this group inquiry together. So if you're new to this session or you weren't here for the last few weeks, I want you to trust an image that arises or a memory of where you believe the thought, they hurt me with their criticism. And then we're just going to jump ahead because that's what we're working on this week. What we do with advice is, in this situation, what advice would you offer to him or her? So he or she should or shouldn't. And so you can see the examples. Paul shouldn't frighten me with his behavior. He should take a deep breath. So what I suggest you do with your advice is not to say he should stop criticizing me, because that's a want. You can do that in the wants. That's where you can whine and tantrum. But in the advice, try to make it doable. And so that's why I have, he should realize that criticism hurts me. That's easier than saying he should stop criticizing me. Okay? And this is, I've given the example each week of my son. He should close the garden gate. And I told him that for a long time and he never closed it. But when I recognized through a training session that doable advice is more subtle, I said, he should realize how important my garden is to me. And when I said that to him, he never left the gate open again. So people don't like to get advice, but it's much softer to just say, you know, he could understand, or he could realize, or in this case, they should realize that criticism hurts me. That's very doable advice. So before we continue, I just want to make sure that everybody has found their situation if they weren't here before. Let's see, I'll just scroll through. So yes, I see some people haven't been here. So find that situation in your life where it feels really true to you that they should realize that criticism hurts me. Their criticism hurts me. This is really important work, and it's a way to heal without anybody else having to change. We get to recognize that we are the person we've been waiting for, and that our happiness does not depend on anything outside of ourselves. And of course, we are most fortunate because we have Baba, and we know that he's always there in our hearts as we remember him and hold on to his Dhamman. So let me know now if anybody needs more time to find their situation. They should realize that criticism hurts me. So for the newcomers, what we do is we unmute ourselves for the group inquiry. And as I take you through the 4 questions of the work, the first 2 questions are just a yes or a no. And if you don't know, then it's a no. And so I'm just going to ask you the first question. And before I ask it, I'm going to ask you to just take a few gentle breaths, and you can really go within and close your eyes and just relax, because this is how you get really in contact with your inner wisdom. So take a few gentle breaths. So is it true that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? And when you're ready, you just voice a yes or a no. Yes. Is it true they should realize that their criticism hurts me? And I think everybody's muted, so you're going to have to unmute to do this group inquiry. So Diantha, do you need to unmute everyone?
I could do that. Let's see.
So just give out your yes or no when you've found what's true for you. Is it true that this person that you're working on should realize that their criticism hurts me?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Nope.
Yeah. And the longer you do this work, the easier it is to find a no, and you will realize that as we go along. So if you said yes to the first question, then I'm going to ask you the second question. And if you said no, you can just wait. Can you absolutely know that it's true that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? And take a whole minute to just ponder. Can I absolutely know that it's true that their criticism hurts me? No.
No.
Yes.
And there's no wrong answer. You can't do it wrong. I hear yes and I hear no's. So are we ready to go on? Is anybody still need more time to find their answer if they can absolutely know that it's true? That
It's not bad. Today's kind of cloudy, but we've enjoyed some.
they should realize that their criticism hurts me. Okay. Okay, we're going to go on to question 3. So Diantha, you can put up. Question 3 has quite a few sub-questions which actually just support question 3, which is, how do you react? What happens when you believe the thought that their criticism hurts me? How do you react? What happens when you believe the thought that their criticism hurts you? There it is. So think about the emotions you feel when you're believing that thought and just speak them out.
Angry.
Okay, great. So anger. What else? Hurt. Yes.
I withdraw.
Okay.
Self-protective, same thing, I guess.
Yeah. And we're just looking at emotions right now, but you know, withdrawing is also how you treat yourself. That's one of the sub questions down farther, and it's fine to just say anything that comes up. And the purpose of these sub questions is just to give you a little inventory of all the possible ways you can respond to question 3, to find how you react when you're believing that thought. Because this is what helps us not go into what we call the story, which is really easy to do. And we learn in the work to be more succinct and recognize that there's a in what they call an interpreter in the brain, who's always trying to spin its story, even though it's a sad or angry story, because it's familiar and there's some kind of perverse security in that familiarity. So with the emotions that you found, whether it's anger, hurt, whatever it is, where do you feel that in your body? This is really an important part of it. Locate in your body where you feel the anger, the hurt. It will be different for everyone. And when you have located it, just speak it out loud.
Solar plexus.
Okay, good. Yeah. And so, was that Robin who said that?
Yep.
Are you willing to share the sensations that you feel in your solar plexus? Because this is what everybody needs to do with their emotion.
Just a tightness and like a blockade.
Yes, yes, yes. That's something that I feel oftentimes. That's kind of my go-to place, you know, is it's tight in the solar plexus. Does anybody else want to share anything? And you don't have to, but if you feel like it, there's really, we're all in this together. I mean, there's nothing unique for anyone, believe me.
I think I feel it in my solar plexus and my throat
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I can't speak up what I know is truth.
Yes, and you know, you have brought that up before, and so that's really important to notice.
Mm-hmm.
And when we go into the sensations, just go into one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have felt the sensation in different parts of your body, like sometimes you might feel it in your head, in your heart, in your solar plexus, you know, in your arms. I mean, I have a client who has Parkinson's and she always feels it in her back and arms. And when she does the work, she always finds relief. So even if you have an ongoing medical issue, the work still works for you. So we're going to take a minute now and really penetrate with your mind. This is where we learn to discipline our mind. And we're going to go into that sensation, wherever it is for you personally. And you're going to be the objective observer, witnessing it, because Baba tells us that the soul is aloof from the mind and the body. And so that's really the place we want to go, to be the witness. We are not these things. These are just our sanskaras. And the more we can detach from it, the easier it is for us to release it with awareness and compassion. Okay, so let's just take a minute and really focus your mind. This is learning to discipline that mind, which is like wild horses. We're going to harness them and we're going to ask them to just move in one direction, which is deep, deep into the core of our suffering. Okay. And then I'll ask you to report any changes that you notice if you'd like to share. Just keep focusing on that sensation that's uncomfortable wherever you feel it. So I'm just reminding you that neuroscientists have studied this modality, and they have found that something will shift in 60 to 90 seconds. It may go to a deeper level of pain, but oftentimes it shifts into something else. So is there anyone who would like to share what they noticed as they penetrated into that difficult sensation?
Well, it takes me back to an image with my father.
Okay.
And not
can-
even an image, just a feeling of from different situations where I would have
Okay.
reacted, where I would have felt hurt or criticized. So
Yes, yes. So what I always recommend that you do is just make a little note of that particular, I know it wasn't a particular situation, but if you take a note that will jog your memory, that would be a separate inquiry. So oftentimes when we're doing one inquiry, other things arise that we need to attend to at another time. But it's really important to just follow the thread of this particular inquiry. So let's put the sub-questions back up, Diantha.
And I had a sort of an image of a round like ball being sort of pried out of where it, like, instead of a general feeling, it kind of, part of it turned into like a little ball kind of, and it got sort of pushed out and mushed away.
And so did it release some of the tension, or was it
Some of it.
some of it? Okay,
Yeah.
so it was kind of a positive thing, right? So what you just said reminds me of something that I've just started studying from Tibetan Buddhism. I'm reading a book called Feeding Your Demons. And in Tibet, you know how they have those fierce demons and guardians. And actually what they are is just what we're working on, all the repressed elements of our consciousness. And so what this author recommends, which sounds sort of like what you're describing, Robin, is we personify that, you know, quote, demon. Like, what does it look like? And it, you know, you describe something. And then she goes on to say that you can ask it what it wants of you. And this is very much what we do in the work. We allow the stressful thoughts to come up and we honor them, which is just like asking them, what do they need from us? And, you know, usually it's attention and respect and honoring that it's been a part of our life journey and we have suffered from it. And then she said, you put yourself in, the reason the book is called Feeding Your Demons is because you offer yourself as nectar for that demon, that personified blob or whatever it is, and you become what they tell you they need. And you get completely consumed by this. And she said she's had dramatic results with this. So this is just another visualization or way of doing the kind of work that we're doing, allowing that needy, wanting part of ourselves, allowing ourselves to give ourselves to it as nectar to be consumed. And then that demonic energy becomes an ally. And I've talked about how important it is to befriend our inner critic, which is another demon. They can become inner allies. So it's very parallel work. So that's just another thing to be aware of. When we keep repressing and suppressing our shadow side, it actually grows. And when we have the courage to just be with it for a while, it will integrate. We start so we've projected it outside of ourselves, and now we're projecting it onto a demon. And then when we can see what it really is, we start integrating those parts of ourself that we've rejected. And oftentimes, we even reject really positive parts of ourself. For instance, if we were very creative as a child, but that creativity wasn't honored or respected or supported by our parents, that becomes part of our shadow. So positive things can go into the shadow. And things like our anger and our hurt, those always go and become our shadow. And what we learn to do is honor those feelings without expressing them outwardly, in anger towards someone. So let's go back now to the sub-questions. So this is kind of a beginner sub-question. Whose business are you in when you're believing the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? So whose business is that they should realize their criticism hurts me?
Theirs.
Yeah. So every time we go out of our own business, we suffer. And we did a whole session on the 3 kinds of business: my business, other people's business, and God's business. And when we understand what Baba has said about the mind projecting the world, then we can live at a different level where we can recognize that this is that Maya that is the necessary medium for God realization. So the person who triggers the hurt in us by their criticism is actually giving us a gift. And I was just being reminded the other day where Baba says, the people who backbite you take on your samskaras. So he said, look at it as a gift. Do you remember that? So they're taking on your sanskaras. Now, I feel bad that they have to take on my sanskaras, but, I can have compassion for them. I think it's unfortunate, but they are giving you a gift when they criticize you because they are actually taking on your sanskaras. So now we're going to go on to how do you treat that person when you're believing the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? How do you treat that person? Even if only in your mind, and just speak out when you notice. How do you treat them?
Push them away.
Push them away. Yeah.
Yeah, I reject them with some anger.
Yeah, I was just going to say something like that in a situation that just happened recently. I got caught off guard and I just felt really triggered, and it just happens. So even if you don't express anger, I think I felt more like irritated, and I looked down on them. I actually did. I looked down on this person, when she was criticizing me. I thought she was really, not very aware. So anybody else notice how they treat that person when you believe the thought they should realize that their criticism hurts me?
Sometimes I retaliate.
Yeah, yeah. So this is our practice. You see, life just gives us our practice because we can get better at it, and we can be gentle with ourselves and patient, and just notice when we don't respond with equanimity. So now this is a more difficult question to notice. How do you treat yourself when you believe the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? How do you treat yourself?
I think I tend to internalize the criticism.
Good to notice. Yes, I know that one very well. And it's really insidious. Can everybody find that where you have actually believed it, and even if you couldn't find it, that you felt like, well, I must be wrong, just for general principles?
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like I'm not very good. Some feeling like
Yes. Yes.
that. I guess I'm not a very good person, or I messed up or something like that.
Yeah. And Katie calls that a universal belief. I did something wrong, I'm unworthy, I'm worthless. That is a very, very common reaction,
Hmm.
And not to mention to our own self-criticism, right? Other people criticize us and we criticize ourselves, and there's nothing good that comes out of it.
It
So,
kind of flips back to the one before too, because what I've done is, it happens to be the specific situation I'm thinking about is my brother, who I love, and so I would give him more power, and and believing it and giving him more power, and also that opened myself up to more abuse.
yes, very, very important awareness. I realized I forgot to put in my earphones. Can you hear me well enough?
Oh, very
Okay, so we're
good.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought the ear things helped, but so Paula, thank you so much for bringing this up. This is really a codependent issue. That there's somebody we kowtow to, and then they get more powerful, but we feed that, we create it for them, and it's really important dynamic to notice. When am I doing that? And when am I on either side of that story? I mean, I could definitely see where I've been on both sides, So just really notice how you treat yourself.
With that emotional entanglement too, there's a lot of risk and fear in it.
Did you say risk?
Risk and
Yes.
fear. And which makes it, like she was saying, same thing happened to me. My throat, I lived for years with my throat being really tight because I couldn't speak my truth.
Yes.
It was too scary.
Yes. And what I love about the work is that we can speak the truth to ourselves. And that's the most important thing to do. And when we learn to speak the truth to ourselves, then we will find naturally that we're able to speak the truth to another person when it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that person just disappears. I mean, I've had, over the last 10 years since I've been doing this work, my world has changed. I mean, I just have different people in my life, because you'll find that some relationships don't want to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be open and honest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard. I mean, I suffered over a few of my friends. I was very attached, but I recognized, and I do think that has been for me one of the most difficult aspects of the work, is really honoring the need to be detached. And Baba talks about this, and look at him. He has unconditional love for all of us, and yet he is detached. And this is where we need to go in order to be free. And that doesn't mean we don't love. We do, but it becomes a much more universal kind of a love, I think. So let's now look at any addictions or obsessions that manifest when we're believing the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me. Just notice, we all have our little addictions or obsessions that manifest when we are suffering. And it's okay, it's the human condition, but it's really good to notice it.
Peanut butter cookies.
Yeah. 2 thumbs up. Yeah.
Definitely cookies. chocolate chip though for me.
Oh yeah. Okay, I'm gonna share mine. My latest one is watching a Netflix series called Heartland, and it's all about horses. And I love horses, and I love watching these galloping horses, and and yet I know that I should just like not. Sometimes I watch a little bit too much. So that's my obsession. That's my addiction. And you know what? It's okay. We can't be you can't be harsh with yourself. It doesn't work. I mean, does everybody know that's true? Every
Yeah.
time we try to be really stern and harsh,
Yeah.
it boomerangs. And so the more kind thing to do is to just notice, maybe what am I missing in my life? Do I need to go ride a horse? I've been thinking about that. I haven't ridden a horse for a long time, and now I've got this idea to take my daughter-in-law horseback riding for her birthday, and going on a beautiful trail ride. But be kind. We have to be very kind to ourselves.
And
And
I
I
do
also
that too.
go
I do
ahead,
that
Paula.
with series. Ruth gave us a new one, and it's called Good Karma Hospital on Prime. And what I
Oh,
have to do, it's so good because it's India, and it's so good. It just takes you there, it's wonderful. But anyway, what I have to do with those is, because it's like I always feel like I should be doing something different, or I should be doing something, and it's like trying to integrate Baba into everything. So sometimes I'll say, Baba, watch it with me, okay? I really love
yes,
this. Maybe
yes.
I feel kind of guilty for missing Artie, which comes from a Catholic background.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah. Well, you know what this reminds me of? I've done worksheets on Baba, and it's been a very profound experience because, those shoulds, oh, I should be doing RT,
yeah.
I've really learned that that's not necessarily true, and I love it when Baba says, if you're going to do something like, sometimes if I remember I want to have some alcohol, I just invite Baba to have it with me.
Yeah.
And it's, he's so non-dual, I'm telling you. It's just, I think I mentioned this in an earlier session, that I had done the work on Baba and realized that I had a projection of a punitive God, but I didn't know where it came from, because that wasn't my experience in the church, in a Methodist church. But what I realized after that session was that my father was punitive at times, and he was raised by an authoritarian father. And so he just, this ancestral carrying of family patterns just goes on and on and on. And so that's where it comes from. It's the family conditioning of having an authoritarian patriarch. And of course I am a thinker, and so I thought about, well, Baba with his Mandali, when he was training them, was like really stern and even harsh. But that was for a different reason, and he is the avatar, so we can't compare ourselves to him. But when you really study his life, he was incredibly kind and compassionate. And I have had to recognize that that is who God really is. And doing my Judge-Your-Neighbor worksheets on Baba has really helped me recognize that. And also, the other thing I've gotten from doing worksheets on Baba is that I realized I was giving power to him that he wanted me to have. I became more empowered to listen to my inner wisdom, to the voice of intuition, and just be more creative instead of waiting for Baba to always tell me, And so I don't know if that resonates for anyone else, but it's pretty interesting to do the work on Baba. And anyway, thank you for bringing all of that up. I'm trying to remember where that started from.
But that's a key. I think that's a key. It really rings a bell when you say finding our own power by like listening to our intuition, because we have all of that. Each one of us has that inside ourselves.
Yes. my sense is that it's true for other Baba lovers also, that we tend to not embody it as much as we might, just because we have an impression of what Baba wants, and it may not, and it may be limiting. I guess that's what, for example, when I felt inspired to weave Baba's words on the mind with the work of Byron Katie, I definitely felt an inner critic come up and say, you can't do that. That's not right. Who do you think you are? Really? And you really just come to the point where you just say, I hear you. And you know, the inner critic, you can also have a conversation. I don't do that so much, you know, except that it's more of an impression of, I hear you, and I am being attentive, and I'm noticing that there's nothing I'm sharing that is hurtful, and that I'm inspired to share it, and I get feedback that it helps people. And so just know that that inner critic is going to be there probably till the end, and it can become an ally, but just being a point of reference to just make sure, okay, is this pleasing to Baba? You know what I mean? It's like, I think he wants us to be adventurous and you know, and of course we are, and I'm always so impressed with the creativity of Baba lovers, you know, with all the music and the theater and all of that beautiful creativity. And but I think some of us tend, if we don't have those sanskaras of music and so on, I think we can tend to limit ourselves. And I just find more and more that my passion is so much about working with the mind and finding that, you know, in Buddhism, the heart mind is one organ, and Baba was the Buddha. So, you know, we can find that this is all absolutely in harmony with what Baba is sharing with us as a way to come closer.
In these ways that we express addictions and things like that, it's another way to remember Baba, just to bring him into, okay, this is what I would like to do. Will you please do it with me? Just be here with me.
Yes.
You know? And just a way to keep him with us. He's always with us, but we can keep him with us too. And ask for help. You know, when I've been desperate a couple times, well, more than couple times, but anyway.
Sure.
But really, with all my heart, not too long ago, I just begged him. I said, help me, you have to help me. You really have to help me. And the next morning it was gone. Beautiful. I mean, it was big and it was just gone. And so, you know, I think part of the work is, or all of the work is, just trying to remember Baba and bring him into everything. That all of this that we're trying to do, and bring him into everything, and try to just raise our consciousness, you know, by saying his, like doing the japs and all these things that are offered are so helpful, because, you know, it's a remembrance that he's with us right here in our house, you know. Anyway,
Yes, definitely. And enjoying things with him too.
Yeah,
you know?
He likes,
like when I'm out in my garden, you know, spring is finally alive here in the Rocky Mountains in Montana, and I always feel Baba and Mara in my garden, and it feels like, you know, the grace of God. It's the most wonderful gift. I mean, nature really restores me, because I can get caught in my head. And so it's really important to find that balance. But I just think it's so important for everyone to find, you know, what is, and we'll work on this next week when we do the needs. Like, what do I need in order to be happy? Because we're not meant to just be in lockstep with our concept of what it means to be a good Baba lover. I think that's one of the pitfalls of organizations, of groups, and Baba certainly spoke to that. And I think we all just have to be mindful to make sure that we're allowing, you know, the freedom of our own individuality to express that is really positive. Okay, so we talked about addictions and obsessions, and then just notice, what are you unable to do when you're believing the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts you? What are you unable to do
They
when
should
you're
realize.
believing that thought? I mean, what comes up for me right away is that I'm unable, when I'm blaming myself, we talked about how we start believing the criticism and feeling really unworthy and bad. When I'm in that place, I'm unable to love myself and open my heart.
Yeah.
Does anybody else notice what they're unable to do when they're believing that they should realize their criticism hurts me?
I find it doesn't empower me. When I'm focusing on they should be realizing that it hurts me, then because I'm kind of focusing on them, it doesn't empower me to just listen and then do what's best.
Yes, thank you for that.
I'm taking away my own action because I'm focusing on them. And when I
Yes.
stop for a moment and tune in, then I can decide, well, do I want to do it differently or not? But how would I respond to them best? First reflect. But anyway, the main thing is it takes away my own action.
Beautiful, beautifully spoken. And I would say that the goal of this process is that it becomes internal. You do not have to do the outer work forever and ever, because what happens over time is that it becomes an internal process. So when you notice what triggers you, you're immediately able to notice how you react and know that it's a trigger and what is it that I need to take care of in myself right now. And so I just like to reinforce for you that there is an end to this, where we do come to a place of much more freedom. Maybe to find out even more what our own business is. That's what happened for me in the work, is I found out what my own business was. And I love it. I love sharing this. So anybody else want to share what you're unable to do when you're believing the thought? And another way to put it is, what do you fail to see when you're believing that thought? That they should realize their criticism hurts me. What do we fail to see when we're believing that thought?
Well,
Well,
if I'm in somebody else's head, I'm not in my head. I'm not present to myself. I get paralyzed.
Yes.
But it's like, because I have read a little bit of what she said, and it's like, if I'm thinking about what they're thinking, everybody's gone for me. I'm
right.
gone for me. Nobody's there.
Yes. And that reminds me of how Baba talks about this universe is just a dream. There isn't anybody there. We're all one. I mean, in reality, that's where we're heading, right? And so if we have a lighter footprint in this myopic universe, and we just start knowing, oh, this is just this Leela, and it's here to wake me up, it just becomes less heavy, doesn't it? It's just less heavy. And we have to keep being reminded, because Maya's pretty thick. It's something that necessarily happened through this evolutionary process we've gone through. And that's what's so beautiful about coming together and sharing this, because it just reinforces for all of us to lighten up and to just notice that, hey, this is all about me. It's not about anybody else. It's really, it is kind of comical. I mean, it's a tragedy, but it's a comedy too, right? I mean,
Baba
the
did
things
say
are we've created.
Yeah,
What?
Baba did say we take ourselves way too seriously.
Yes.
Me
Yes.
too.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I think that's why I have to do this work, is because I can be really serious. And I'm really happy, you know, when I'm feeling joy. Like, I just need to do that more. But there is a place for seriousness, especially if we're going to, you know, come closer to Baba and recognize perspective. You know, Baba says, what does he say? He says, take me seriously. Somebody probably knows the quote. He says, does anybody have it? He says,
Well,
everybody takes the world too seriously, but
God
what is it,
alone is
Damien?
real. And yeah, I can't say it either, I guess.
well, it basically like take
People,
God. People take the world seriously.
Yes.
Take God seriously. So take God seriously and don't take the
Yes.
world.
Thank you. So that's what we're doing here. We're learning through questioning our thoughts to lighten the seriousness of these problems that seem really serious.
and
But it's all because of our minds. Our minds have projected the universe, and we're believing our story even when it's sad. So our work is to recognize that it's just a story, and we were responsible for it. We created our story, and now we're uncreating it. Yay!
When I can, when it used to be easier for me to do this, I don't know why it's gotten harder, but once I'm aware that I'm like caught in some of that delusion or whatever, if I can, I thank Baba for it, because he's both showing me what it is that I need to work on, and he's
Yes.
reminding me of him because I'm suffering, and so, you know, it makes me, it helps me to remember him and say his name and give it up sometimes.
Yes. Thank you for that. For whatever reason, we humans tend to rise to the occasion when we have a really difficult challenge. And it's just, you know, it's just a particular way of being, I guess. And so the challenges do become the gift. And that's really why we are learning to accept the gift of criticism, because it's bringing us home to ourself. And Baba is our true self, and we're creating more room in our heart for Baba to be so alive and well in us. And it's just such a wonderful way to remember him. So we're going to move on to question 4, unless anybody has something else they want to share.
And I've been, this is Fershte. I've been listening, and thank you. Really been enjoying it while I'm working on another project. My ears to you guys. Came to mind is if we don't internalize the criticism, it kind of also leaves a space for not projecting as to what may have been going on with them to have done that to us. And so part of this compassionate heart to me is trying to put myself in their shoe and look at myself from their point of view. What did I trigger in them? And, you know, in that sense, if I just curl up in my corner and feel sorry for myself, I'm missing the opportunity to project into them and see it from their side as well.
Yes, thank you. That is so important. The more we learn to get out of other people's business, the easier it is to feel compassion for their situation. We just notice that they're suffering too, right? People aren't critical when they're not suffering. So yeah, thank you so much. That's beautiful sharing.
So what
Anybody else? Go
Yes.
ahead, Paul.
And so what you just said is the root of criticism is suffering. The root of anybody's
Think
criticism.
about that.
Yeah. Well, you kind of just said that. That's really cool. Yeah, that the root of any criticism of myself or in anybody else is suffering.
Because we wouldn't criticize if we weren't suffering.
Yeah.
And this brings me back again to, you know how Baba, he never blamed Colonel Irani, who just did everything he could to be negative about Baba, you know, with his literature and all of that. And what would Baba say? He's just helping me in my work. I mean, and so we can say that too, because if somebody criticizes us, and if it sticks, then we can go inside and just find, well, is there any truth in that? And remember the story I think I gave last week about Byron Katie when she was working in prison and the guy was criticizing her appearance. And she was like, oh, this is fascinating. Tell me more, tell me more. You know, her only thought was he'd make a great stylist. So we can really get to that place, you know, we can. And you, in my experience, it's layers, you know, it's just layers coming off. And if we get triggered, we still don't have to react. We can just go, okay, I'm going to look inside and see where that could be true, because I want to be criticized so that I can be done with it. I want to grow if there's any truth. And if there isn't any truth, it's not going to really stick unless, as we spoke earlier, we have such a strong belief that we're unworthy and we're flawed. And if that is part of the psychology, what I did, because I had that situation, I just started, when my inner critic started telling me how stupid and all these things I was, I just did the opposite. I made myself go, oh, Anne, I love you so much. You're so sweet, and I know you're doing the best you can. And I'm telling you, my inner critic just stopped because it didn't really want to hear all that. So it worked.
Shut up.
It's like, yeah, we're always going to make mistakes. We're always going to fail. So what? We're doing the best we can, right? I mean, Baba said everything that's happened had to happen and no one's to blame. You know, Katie says everything happens for us, not to us. So it's really about just lightening up and remembering what Baba said, you know, to be serious about him and not about the world. So let's move on to question 4. Who would you be without the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? Who are you without that thought? You can just put Baba up. Diantha, just put a nice Baba up. Who are you?
Can you say the question again?
Yes. Who would you be without the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me? Who are you without that thought? And really, we've just been talking about it, and it's good to just repeat, you know, what you've realized already.
What I came up with was, I am free. I am free, and I am still connected to this person.
Oh, that's lovely. That's very magnanimous. Yes, thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Who you are without the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts you.
Right?
And what?
I would probably feel more empowered and more willing to give them feedback. If I think they hurt me and know it, I'm going to shrink away and lick my wounds.
Yes. And from the things you've said before, it sounds to me like you already have a handle on that, that you are able to retreat, gather your thoughts, and then share when the time is right for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the moment passes and I let it go.
And that's fine. You know, I always think that it's beautiful to take time out. If you know that you're not quite ready to process the whole thing, you can always come back later and share how you feel and continue on. I mean, I used to do that all the time because it just wasn't at my fingertips.
Well, I always think of it later, what would have been the thing to say. So
it's okay to say it later, as long as it's, you know, a positive statement that make it about you. You know, it's like we also in the work make amends, which is also what they do, I think, in 12-step programs. And we always only talk about our part in it. We never say what the other person's part in it was. And that was really hard for me in the beginning because I always like to point out the other person's part in it. That's not the work, believe me, because we become so much more empowered by just taking care of our own business. And then other people actually really change around us. They notice it. I've told you before, my children, I have a completely different relationship with them because I stay out of their business. And then some of my friends fell away, and I just had to notice that I probably would no longer enjoy that relationship because I had moved into a new place. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It made me think of, Jackie, with yours, that you would feel, if you weren't controlled by that thought, you would feel you have a voice, whether you use it right now or after thinking about it, but you have the ability to speak up.
But oftentimes later, it just doesn't feel right to revisit it. Like the energy's gone around it, you know?
Yeah, and that could definitely be true. You know, the only caveat I would put on that is that if it's a recurring situation with the same person,
okay,
then it would be something to just be clear for yourself, not for that person, but clear for yourself. Yeah. And sometimes not saying anything is the right thing to do. I mean, the more you learn to trust your inner wisdom, the stronger it gets. And Baba talks about that. You know, he calls it intuition. It's the voice of the heart. It's his voice. And the more we trust it, the more we can hear it. And we just have to keep really being open to that. So let's move on to the turnarounds for the work. And Diantha is going to post the turnarounds for this week. They should realize that, I think I just put that criticism hurts me. Yes. And so these are the turnarounds for the work. Find 3 genuine specific examples for each of the turnarounds below that could be as true or truer than your original statement. So you can see here the turnaround to the self. I should realize that criticism hurts me. And we could even say, I should realize that my criticism hurts me. That would be a very complete turnaround to the self. And we've been discussing this. So again, bring up a few examples, because remember, the work only works when you live it. And like when we're in our inquiry circle, it's also clear, it all becomes so clear. But believe me, when you get out into life again and those challenges come into your life, that's when it's important to remember the examples. Katie calls the examples that we find in the turnarounds our prescription for happiness. So if you find a specific example of, I should realize that my criticism hurts me, then you could write it down, and you can be mindful because it is going to come up again, and you're going to notice it right away, and you're going to just love yourself through it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So does anybody want to share an example? I should realize that my criticism hurts me. And if you've already given one, you could just repeat it, because it's a reinforcement.
Well, if I'm criticizing myself, I'm more prone to self-destructive or self-sabotage behaviors.
Thank you. And so we can even be really specific. It hurts me when I eat too many peanut butter cookies.
That's right.
It hurts me when I watch too many Heartland. You know, it's like I just need to get up and run around. Can anybody else find an example of I should realize that my criticism hurts me? It's always good to find 3, just because you want to reinforce it so that the next time it happens, you're able to catch yourself in the act of self-criticism.
Do you mean like my criticism hurts
Me.
my criticism of other people hurts me?
Well, right now we're talking about my criticism of myself. For example,
Okay.
when we believe the thought that they should realize that their criticism hurts me, and then we talked about how then we criticize ourselves and we believe that we're really flawed, we are criticizing ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's just important to notice that. And for example, when I told you that I decided I had to automatically, when I saw my self-judgments, like, oh, you're so stupid, I just had to go, you're doing, oh, Anne, I love you, you're doing the best you can. And it really changed things. So that's an example of what you can do when you're criticizing yourself. You know, that would be something constructive you could do during the week. Oh, I can say something nice about myself. Because you should be able to find positive things about yourself, you know, in a kind of an objective way. I mean, it's true, I'm doing the best I can. That was a true statement for me. I was really trying to shift a lot of my awarenesses, and I couldn't do it fast enough. So let's move on to the turnaround to the other. And that also begins with an I statement. And you can find these turnarounds on the bottom of the Judge-Your-Neighbor Worksheet, on the bottom right, so that you can internalize how to do these turnarounds. Because believe me, when you can automatically do them right when you're in a situation, it's just gonna make it so much lighter. So what would be an example of, I should realize that criticism hurts them? So the first example that comes up for me is what Baba told us. They're taking on my sanskaras. Yikes. That hurts them. They got more sanskaric load. They're criticizing me. That was the original statement. They were hurting me with their criticism. And then we're doing the turnaround. Instead of they should realize, I should realize that their criticism hurts them. Does anybody else have an example?
I have one that I'll be vague about, but
That's okay.
just that if I am criticized by someone who I really wanted to please and was really aiming to get some positive response from, then if they criticize me, then it hurts them because I'm no longer going to want to probably help them.
Yeah.
Or please them for a little while.
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, we could spend a whole session on that one. And I'll just say one word about it is we really have to get to the root of our motivations. What is our motive, and make sure that, you know, it's a pure motive. So I should realize, but thank you, that was a good example. Does anybody else have an example of I should realize that criticism hurts them?
Well, if I realize that criticism hurts them, and I understand that their criticism comes from suffering, they're hurting.
Yes.
And that's where it comes from, which helps with compassion for me to,
Oh,
help
beautiful.
compassion in me.
Yeah, yes, beautiful. Yeah.
It really helps us to realize that most people really, really suffer, whether it looks like it or not.
I mean, I would say suffering is the human condition, and of course Baba says the cause of suffering is selfishness. He also says desire, which is what the Buddha said. The cause of suffering is desire, and the cure for suffering is no desires. And so, we just have to recognize what am I desiring? In this situation, I'm desiring that somebody shouldn't criticize me. So that's a cause of suffering. We don't want to be criticized. But if we wanted to be enlightened, we would welcome it. But we don't want to be overwhelmed. We need to, we need to pace ourselves, right? We can be kind to ourselves on the journey. Yeah. So let's move on to the turnaround to the opposite. So they shouldn't realize that criticism hurts me. And we've talked about this, and I'm just going to give a refresher on it since we have a few new people today. When we do the turnaround to the opposite, one of the foundational principles of the work is that reality rocks. So they shouldn't realize that criticism hurts me if they're not realizing it. So we really accept reality as it is. And that's a huge cornerstone of the work. When you notice that we're constantly trying to go into the past or the future and not be in the present, that is a cause of suffering. We need to deal with the present, feel those uncomfortable feelings that need to be felt, and then we start having the clearer lens. The dust is coming off the mirror of our mind, as Baba describes it. So they shouldn't realize that criticism hurts me. It's not even necessary. I just need to realize it.
Yeah, it's like that's my job, not their job.
Yes. And remember when we've talked about the victim consciousness? So all of the work that we do is weaning us from believing that we're a victim. In my experience, unless we're enlightened, everybody has a certain victim consciousness. And it's really empowering to wean ourselves away from believing that we're victims. And it's hard work and it's ongoing. But what I love about the work is that it just gives us this step-by-step, methodical, reliable process. All we have to do is identify our stressful thought. What am I thinking and believing right now that's the cause of my suffering? And then we just ask the 4 questions and do the turnarounds and find a lot more freedom at the other end of it. Because we're recognizing that nothing's ever really happened. In reality, Baba says nothing has ever happened and nothing ever will happen. Isn't that something? And so there's another opposite that we can do. They should realize that criticism helps me. So that's just another, you can find sometimes more than one opposite. Instead of they should realize that their criticism hurts me, they should realize that their criticism helps me. And how could that be true? Especially for us Baba lovers, we can easily think of an example, right? They just took a load of my sanskaras. Not that I would wish that on anyone, believe me.
You know how
It is.
I got this picture in my mind. You know how Jesus said, turn the other cheek? Well, I'm not sure he meant get hit. I think he meant duck.
Well, and yes, and I've heard that it compared to martial arts, which is kind of like just swerve out of the way,
Yeah, you
right?
just, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you take it. You take what, you know, then you have the, if you do that, then you have the opportunity to take the gift.
Yes. It's so true. And it's a work in progress. And just remember that when the rubber meets the road of daily life, that's where we get to practice all of what we work on during our inquiry circle. And that's the most important part, is integrating this awareness into our lives. And we just keep working at it one bit at a time. And so let's see, how are we doing? Okay, so does anybody else have anything they'd like to say about the turnaround to the opposite, or anything about this session before I read our closing quote?
Can I say something?
I would love that.
The question I have is, I'm listening to this extremely beautiful love, wisdom, freedom, is I do feel a victim regarding having been kidnapped. The way this whole health challenge has been so poorly mishandled, I feel a victim of that. How can I turn that around?
By questioning your stressful thoughts. Blame COVID, write a worksheet on COVID, and just follow the simple directions. And then email me and I'll give you a session and we'll get through it. There is nothing in this world that you can be a victim of in reality. But why do we do that? Why do we believe we're victims? We actually believe that it's easier sometimes to be a victim. But I have found that it never is. It never makes life easier to put ourselves in the victim mode.
And could you send me the sheet by email, please?
Say that again?
Would you be able to send me those questions? Could you please email me the sheet of those questions?
The Judge-Your-Neighbor Worksheet?
Yeah,
I'll
the
do
questions
that.
to do the turnaround. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll do that. And then you have my email, because I know you've emailed me, and we can set up a session and I'll take you through it. And you could also re-listen to the coronavirus week that we did.
Thank you.
It never hurts to go over this material. Pardon me?
Could you give us your email? I don't have it.
It's Anne, ANNE, at kindreality.com.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm going to read this quote, and then we have time to say our goodbyes afterwards. But for anyone who has to leave, this is a quote from Adi K. Irani's book, Just to Love Him. And it's under the chapter entitled The Importance of Meher Baba's Tomb. The mind is as helpful as it is destructive. It is the same game of love and hate that goes on with all. What? Oh, I thought somebody said something. It is the same game of love and hate that goes on with it all the time. It loves and hates. It constructs and destroys. So it is the mind that we have to tackle. Without it, we cannot live or exist. Eventually, like a scaffolding of a building that is erected for constructing a wall, it has to be discarded. But even when the wall is constructed, we fall in love with the scaffolding and we do not want to give it up. We embrace the scaffolding and eschew the wall. Similarly, we eschew reality and embrace our mind, with which we have been associated for who knows how long. Millions of births and deaths. The mind eventually has to go, but we cannot try to force it out. I always said this mind is like a barking dog that follows the man. If you kick the dog, then it bites you. So we cannot afford to kick it or to be absolutely unresponsive to it. We have to respond. And that's what we're doing with the inquiry. We're responding to the mind without kicking it. But the time comes when we have to disregard the promptings of the mind. Knowing that all of the promptings the mind gives are not really helpful, we should not give great importance to it. This mind is as important as it is unimportant. And these are the two things we must know. We must exercise a game of love and hate with this mind. We cannot do without it, but if we try to follow our mind to the bitter end of our lives, I think we would destroy ourselves. I thought that was interesting from Adi K. Arani. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share before we say goodbye?
Well, Anne, this has been incredible. It's been such a help, and you are so kind, and you make it really easy, and I just really appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Me too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm glad the folks who are with Mara program got to see some of this good work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff,
Well, and it's wonderful. It's all recorded on Robin's YouTube channel too. And it does build upon itself. So it's really good to follow them in order. I think this is our 7th session. Yeah. So next week, we're going to do the next statement on the Judge-Your-Neighbor Worksheet, which is all about what we need in order to be happy. So you can think about that or not. You know, it's like, in order for you to be happy in this situation, what do you need this person who criticized you to think, say, feel, or do? So I need them to, and you can just, this is what you need to be happy. And we're going to focus on our needs, which are very different from our wants. This is for the heart happiness. And again, you know, this is kind of a, what do they call it? When you give the end of the story before you've gotten there. What do they call that? There's a name for it.
oh,
Anyway.
A spoiler alert?
A spoiler. This is my spoiler alert. It's always going to come back to giving yourself what you need. But the sweetest part of it is that we have Baba. And so when we feel Baba more and more in our hearts, he's our beloved. And so, you know, this lover-beloved relationship just gets sweeter. And, you know, Baba said if he was ever any religion, it would be Sufi. And it is because it is the internal love affair. And that is where our true happiness lies. And so we're getting weaned from all of these outer world needs and longings and wants, and coming closer and closer to him. And that is the purpose and intention of all of this. So it's really my great privilege to share this with you. I feel so grateful to Baba for giving me the inspiration to share the work.
Well, I got 2 of her books.